since I'm trying to kind of go through the Lord of the Rings relatively fast, because what tends to happen with series that I do is, uh, the first one gets attention and then they sort of get waning attention over time, which reduces my interest in continuing to do it. So I thought, why not start with Iron is Hot because people are taking some interest in this series. Um, and I thought I would just go ahead and try to record this right before the beginning Old Norse class this evening. So if you've been following along with the Lord of the Rings read-throughs, I've gotten to chapter 7. The hobbits have met Tom Bombadil, which, I think this collection of 3 chapters, chapter 7, 8, 9, and the House of Tom Bombadil, Bog on the Barrow Downs, and At the Sign of the Prancing Pony are perhaps the 3 chapters that I will have the least to say about of the entire book. Um, I am just sort of baffled by Tom Bombadil, as I suppose just about everybody has been. I have, a couple stray remarks here and there. I noticed that very often um, Tom Bombadil refers to willows and things associated with willows as withy. That is a legit old uh, Germanic word for the willow. In fact, that forms the Old Norse word for the willow, the be there. In fact, it's possible that that withy word that he uses for Withy and Tolkien spelling that he uses for willow is cognate with the name of the son of Odin who avenges Odin on Fenrir, Vidar, according to an idea put forward by Anatoly Lieberman that's included in his essays and collected in his book In Prayer and Laughter, which is kind of hard to find. Anatoly actually traces the origin of the name of the god Vidar to like Vida guy's Oz, so like the willow spear. Not that we have a tradition of him using a spear made out of willow, but it's an interesting and plausible etymology. So that's the first thing that really came to mind, other than being baffled by Tom Bombadil. Um, I've commented a few times, separate from any old Norse connected things, just how surprising uh, it is to me sometimes what a personal fantasy the Lord of the Rings is, fantasy about community, fantasy about friendship. I also note how lovingly he describes going to sleep at Tom Bombadil's house. Quote, their mattresses and pillows were soft as down, and the blankets were of white wool. They had hardly laid themselves in the deep beds and drawn the light covers over them before they were asleep, off quote. And I thought, God, who doesn't fantasize about sleeping like that, right? I mean, you get to be my age or whatever, and you struggle to sleep like that. So I feel like he's sort of fantasizing about sleeping. I also thought, I just something that I wrote in the margins of this book, and maybe it would be fun to figure out a way to to I don't know. Patreon doesn't let me do uh, raffles that can't be random chance, but I wonder if there is some way that we could figure out to get my annotated quote unquote Lord of the Rings to somebody somehow. I'd have to figure out, like, I couldn't run it as a contest on Patreon. I would have to do it off Patreon or figure out, like, it'd be interesting. I'll think about it. Um, but anyway, I wrote as a note in the margin as just going through all this Tom Bombadil stuff. Um, we forgive books that we're ready to like. Um, I feel like the people that I see sort of rush to the defense of the Tom Bombadil diversion would not rush the defense of, a fantasy book that I wrote if it included scenes that were so completely off topic, off center. But people are ready to like this book, and so they're sort of they leap to the defense of it, even though I really cannot tell how this is connected to the overall narrative. Um, but here and there are hints of the sort of deeper mythos that I know was near and dear to Tolkien's heart. Um, Tom tells stories to the hobbits, and uh, we hear, quote, when they caught his words again, they found that he had now wandered into strange regions beyond their memory and beyond their waking thought, into times when the world was wider and the seas flowed straight to the western shore, and still on and back Tom went, singing out into ancient starlight when only the elf sires were awake. Off quote. I thought, like, I vaguely know what this is from having read the Silmarillion a long time ago, but it's almost better just left like this, like it is in Lord of the Rings, just as a suggestion, rather than as something fleshed out as much as it is in the Silmarillion. Um, Johan Pietro says, I wonder if that friendship fantasy is a reference to the Inkling Club. If I remember the name right, he and guys like C.S. Lewis were members of before World War One. Yeah, maybe. And I've seen in some of the YouTube commentary a lot of support for the notion that friendship. I said friendship fantasy or nostalgia. I mean, I think I myself said it might trace back to World War One, but a lot of support for the idea that this is camaraderie that he experienced in World War One. And I think that's quite plausible. Dan says Matt Colville is a great video on his channel talking about the Tom Bombadil thing and why that part is in there. He uses a lot of sources and letters from Tolkien in his explanation. All right, well, I owe it to Matt Colville to check that out. I didn't know that he had that video. Um, but Matt Colville is kind of like me. He has so many videos that it's hard for anyone but Matt Colville to know all the videos that he's made. He is, by the way, uh, following along with this series, so I extra owe it to him because he's going to hear that. But regardless of the opinions of Tom Bombadil stands out there, I read about Tom and his weird clothes and Goldberry dancing around and making rain and everything, and I just think, God, these would be such annoying people to know. Right? I just like I don't know if I want these people in my book club. I just feel like they're so eccentric they would sort of draw attention to themselves no matter what. I mean, I've known people like this. I mean, I've lived in Boulder, but anyway. So as we get into chapter 8, I reflect that Tolkien really does big compliment. He magnificently grounds his narrative in the seasons. You can always tell what time of year it is. He's consistent about it. You sort of feel the change of the seasons from moment to moment. He beautifully describes, you know, the daylight and the night and the morning and the sunset and the sunrise. He is great at that stuff. I really want to give him props, as the kids would say. I like it. I like that he's so consistent about it. I mean, I feel like most fictional writers are not as good about this and not as good about keeping a consistent calendar, but he clearly has a calendar in his head for where they are in the year and the week and everything else. I like it. Um, the hobbits emotionally take their leave of Goldberry and all was sort of overwrought to me. I had a moment where I reflected, God, I'm seeing the word gray all the time here. I mean, starting with Gandalf the Gray, but then everything's gray, cold gray shadows and everything else. And I thought to myself, I wonder if J.R.R. Tolkien, maybe together with J.K. Rowling, is responsible for the fact that so many American English writers have begun spelling Grey, because Webster prescribes Gray for American English, but I see a lot of Americans write Grey, and I wonder if it's actually from reading stuff like Tolkien because he uses the word so much. Um, one interesting part of chapter 8, well, of course, we can get into a little bit of uh, some Old Norse notions is the barrow wights. So, of course, he uses this term barrow wight, Wight. Wight, of course, being an old word for, I really like thing, creature. Um, the word not, both Not and Naught, the German word nicht, are actually the negation of this word. They're not a white, right? No thing. Um, yeah, Johann Pietro, exactly. Old Norse. It's actually very inconsistently spelled in Old Norse. You get the spelling you cite there, Vietor. There's a Vitor, just using modern SI pronunciation for these. There's also Vitor. You get a really inconsistently spelled. in Old Norse. It's thing, creature. So the creature that lives in the barrow in the mound. In Old Norse context, this would be a draugur, particularly while it's in the mound. Now I'm using Old Norse pronunciation. Um, and if it leaves the mound, especially, it would be an afturganga, and again walker. Of course, I was I was interested in how differently this is presented, I think, in Tolkien's mythos than it is in the Norse mythic conception, because of course in Norse thinking, there's not really much of a distinction between the soul and the body. So when you put someone in the ground, they are wholly in the ground, right? That person is, from our understanding, body and soul in the grave. And hell kind of is the grave originally, right? Of course, once the dead are out of sight underground, maybe they're moving around down there, meeting up, going to halls and whatever that belong to, the kingdom of hell. But in Tolkien's notion, which seems unsurprisingly a little more Christian, the barrow, the mound itself, almost seems to be some kind of um, purgatory, right? Like there's some deeper afterlife after this, rather than that the mound itself is where the uh, whites or Draugr or what have you is going to dwell forever. I noted when Tom Bombadil comes and saves the hobbits from this thing, uh, that he says, uh, quote, "Get out, you old wight, vanish in the sunlight, shrivel like the cold mist, like the winds go wailing out into the barren lands far beyond the mountains, come never here again. Leave your barrow empty, lost and forgotten be, darker than the darkness, where gates stand forever shut till the world is mended." So it sounds like this is a holding place, a temporary residence in a way that the mound doesn't seem to be in the Norse conception. Of course, again, not surprising from the uh, more literarily modern Christian worldview of Tolkien. I also wonder, by the way, as an aside, I've never heard a recording of Tolkien speaking. I know they exist, but I wonder now if he had the um, which distinction. All right, sorry, folks. Our Wi-Fi is not working, and my hotspot winked out, and the internet's just going haywire here. All I was saying was that since I say, WIGHT different from WHITE, it's somewhat less awkward for me to say this word, and I wonder if it was for Tolkien too, if he distinguished, which. Um, I wondered why the Barrow Wight, the creature in the mound, put all this stuff on the hobbits, right? Because Sam and Pippin and Merry wake up with all this jewelry and armor and stuff on, and I'm wondering, are they supposed to be kind of like possessed by uh, by the dead in the mound or something like that, or are they being dressed to be the servants of the Barrow Wight or something like that? I wasn't real clear about that, but I think that of course that's part of Tolkien's art, probably in suggesting, some horror, some unknown purpose behind the malice of the Barrow Wight. So I give him points at that for that. I thought that the talk about the different ponies and their personalities was a little annoying. I like horses as much as anyone, but the way Tom Bombadil talks about ponies makes me feel like a being patronized. Uh, and then, there's a very masterful, not to just be critical of a very masterful hint of some deeper story that I'm sure we never hear. Um, when, quote, he, Tom Bombadil, chose for himself from the pile of treasure, a brooch set with blue stones, many shaded like flax flowers or the wings of blue butterflies. He looked long at it as if stirred by some memory, shaking his head and saying at last, "Here is a pretty toy for Tom and for his lady. Fair was she who long ago wore this on her shoulder. Goldberry shall wear it now, and we will not forget her." Off quote. Whoever he's talking about, there may be some napkin he wrote part of that story on that Christopher Tolkien has published since, but it's, suggestive again of these deep, dark stories that Tolkien never really tells, he only hints at. Um, just like Tom Bombadil's quote, ancient language whose words were mainly those of wonder and delight, off quote. Well, I can tell you that an ancient language whose sounds are mainly wonder and delight, that is not Sanskrit, not Old Irish. Just remembering studying those, but what? Who knows what exactly Tolkien has in mind there? I actually had probably the least to say about the chapter "The Sign of the Prancing Pony," other than there's the song that Frodo sings that is humorously credited to Bilbo. This sort of proto Man in the Moon song, where Tolkien takes the time to put in a footnote, quote, elves and hobbits always refer to the sun as she, off quote, which of course, I suppose he's expecting his mid-century British audience uh, to be familiar, if they're familiar at all, with gendered languages, to be familiar with French or Latin, where the sun is masculine, but of course in Germanic languages it's feminine. So I suppose that's part of why he favors making the sun feminine and gendered. So those are my main thoughts. Any remarks anybody want to make for a few minutes while I'm hanging out here before my Old Norse Zoom class? I think it's half interesting going through this. I definitely felt like I was slogging a little bit with the Tom Bombadil stuff, but my interest has peaked again as we get back to sort of the main narrative, and of course, um, the very evocative introduction, Strider, um, which has just been endlessly copied and recopied in every dramatic movie and even these Hallmark Christmas movies. Um, sometimes it's the way they introduce the love interest guy who's a little rough around the edges, like he's in the corner at the tavern or whatever. Um, how do I know this? Recovering fiance with control of the remote. Um, also, they've covered some of those books on the 372 pages podcast. Well, all right. Well, Patreon, if you are interested, if you'd like this sort of live meetup to talk about this, I'll try it again. But I thought, at least experimentally do it with whoever wanted to come. Thank you, Lorraine, for the kindness. Um, again, I figure I might as well strike while the iron is hot and just keep doing it, rather than um, try to space it out. Because when I space it out, this one I'm almost guaranteed to run out of gas about it. All right, Dan, Matt, appreciate you. And all right, well, I'll put this up soon. And yeah, I mean, depending on my schedule, yeah, I'll do at least some of these as live meets like this for Patreon. All right. Well, wishing everybody well. I'm gonna run and do the Old Norse class. Wish you all the best for now.